Went for a walk, and nice thing about walks is that it permits you to get all the processes in your body to stabilize. Because they're kind of out of whack during the day. And whenever you take a walk or you exercise, it causes them it causes things to move and lubricate and stabilize and reach some sort of stasis. And in that, your brain is free to kind of get inspired, because you got endorphins and all sorts of stuff that are going through your body as well. And you got the stuff coming from the food. It's triggering dopamine and all that. And then there are forces beyond your cognition that inspire you. Either it's ideas or it's divine inspiration. Who knows? I was sitting there thinking about the Boston album and how Tom Scholz created it. And there's a part of me that always asks, okay, what are people not asking about? What are people not thinking about? What is usually a failure or looks like a failure in the music industry? And I think the thing is that we always expect that technology gets better and better. I mean, that's a human thing. As technology gets better and better, the stuff of the past gets thrown away. We always lose stuff. And as we lose stuff, we fail to incorporate what technologies we leave behind. We don't archive them. I mean, now we do, as a result of people being able to collect vast amounts of data and put it on their hard drives and in storage and sort it out and categorize it. And now we have AI to go and look at it and ask questions of it. And we're going to come up with answers. We're going to find things that we've lost and being able to reincorporate it. At the time that Tom Scholz created that album, there were a number of changes occurring in the engineering sciences. And he was in mechanical engineering, which is probably the best place to be, because it was probably the height of the mechanical engineering sciences in the 70s, as a result of making cars and airplanes and jet planes and stuff like that. He worked for Polaroid, which means he probably was going to have access to chemical engineering, to physical sciences, to things like spectrum analysis, histograms. And then you have the computer, and it wasn't really the computer at that point. There were computers, but there weren't home computers in 76 you did have a home computer. And so you had the capacity to do some computation, but it would require slowing down the tape and doing analysis at a slow pace. That's possible. It probably had something to do with it. Fairlight got started in 1974, and what started them out was access to digital analog converters. And that's your sample playback. And then there's ADCs, analog to digital converters. That's being able to record into a digital format. And there were digital reverbs in 76 or 75. And what those were, as I talked with ChatGPT about it, because what you do is you ask ChatGPT something, ChatGPT gives you something back, you reason it out, and you give it a hint, and then it says, oh yeah, there's this, and this, and that interaction comes up with results. And what was digital about the reverbs then was that they were using shift registers and DACs and analog to digital converters and digital to analog converters on both ends, and then these shift registers that were feeding us, were incorporating bits of information back into the signal by using a parallel, just a parallel assembly line of bits. So that parallel assembly line of bits, the length of the amount of bits that the registers could push, or what a shift register does, it's the part of an ALU or a rhythmic logic unit that shifts the bits by a magnitude of an order 2. It just shifts the bits either left or right, and you can use that to create multipliers and dividers. And the addition subtraction is done with logic gates, XORs, and by creating adders and subtractors, which are really just individual bit adders and subtractors that use complementary, use two's complement and all this stuff to create all of the math operations, and it takes several cycles to do a multiplication or a divide, and those are all involved in moving these shift registers. So all the reverb was just the shift registers. It wasn't anything else, just shift registers. And those were, it could have been ALUs, but the idea was that there was no processor involved. And so it had to be parallel, it had to be a parallel circuit. And so what I imagine is that from all of the stuff that Tom was involved with at the time, he came to an idea of how to automate the production of the sound. He came up with processes that wouldn't become popular for the next decade or so, like automated mixing and stuff like that. He would incorporate things that are kind of like fuzzy logic, which is about adjusting valves and things based upon the stimulus. So the stimulus comes in, and that translates to the adjustment of certain parameters in a system. And that tries to maintain a stasis in a steady state in the system, or a tone. So if his guitar was producing a certain tone, he would pluck a note on his guitar. The sound would go through a parallel circuit, and in that parallel circuit, he would be analyzing the information that's going in and then adjusting it. It would be something like a histogram or something close to histogram, something that was filtering out all the various frequencies, and then writing those frequencies and use it to control the equalizer. And the equalizer would adjust the tone of what the guitar was producing. And he could also trigger other things like delay units and phase effects and whatever. And so as he's playing the guitar, he hears something he doesn't like, he goes and adjusts it, and he goes and adjusts this some parameters on that and sets them in memory. So maybe he stores the information on a tape. And so the tape has got the automation built into it. Maybe it involves some amount of processing, the uses of a simple computer, Even something like an Atari 2600 probably had all of the stuff necessary for him to be able to do what he needed to have done. It would just be a matter of having some RAM. The ROM would have all of he probably had a way of burning ROMs. I don't know if there were programmable ROMs at that point, but a way of use of GALs, which are gate array logic, which is kind of like a memory. What it really is it's a whole bunch of logic gates in a chip, and you can program the orientations in of the logic gates, how you have stuff coming in on a bus. You got all these digital numbers coming in on a bus, and they would go through this matrix of gates, and the gates, they'd be and or not, or it would be and or XOR, or just a bunch of NAND gates, because NAND gates can be made to replicate any other kind of gate process. You can create XORs, ORs, NOTs, and ANDs just with NAND gates. A NAND gate is the NOT of an AND, I think, and it's either the inversion of the input to an AND gate, or it is the inversion of the outputs of an AND gate, or the inversion of one side of an AND. I forget what it was, but all I know is that whenever I went through digital electronics in school, our instructor said the most basic component of digital circuits is the NAND gate. And from that, you can pretty much create everything else in computer science, in the computer engineering sciences. And that is about creating computational equipment. What a computer is, what a CPU is, it's really just a collection of processes that make up a computer. Because before CPUs, computers were analog. They were analog parallel circuits. And for every operation, you would have a whole bunch of these components stuck together. And then somebody came up to the wise idea that through the use of memory and time, they could create all of those complex operations by coordinating all these sub-processes to, like an ALU and whatnot, to simulate what a parallel circuit does. The advantage of a parallel circuit over a sequential circuit is that a parallel circuit does it in all one take. It doesn't have a clock cycle. The clock cycle is what causes a CPU to be able to do operations. The operands are in memory, the operations are in the processor, and so you would have operations that do XORs, ANDs, NOTs, and whatnot, and do math and all these micro operations. And the clock is sort of the ringleader that determines when certain components are on for the data that's coming in, and what's being told what processes are being told to be turned on based upon the program. Because what the program's doing is it's telling which operations need to be turned on, which parts of the what order things need to be turned on, and processing the data that's currently, because what it's going to do is it's going to send bits through those processes. It's going to send trues and falses through that process, and you're putting signal in one end and you're going to signal out the other end, and it's just a held set of ons and offs, and it goes through those processes, and out the other end comes a different set of on and offs, but they're held for one clock cycle. And then that information that comes out is stored in the memory, because the memory, how the stuff is stored is by opening up these things that are like flip-flops. Flip-flops are units that kind of feed back on themselves. And so they're able to hold a state of a bit, whether it's true or false, or it's on or off. It's just one thing or another. And so the output of that particular operation, that micro operation, gets stored in the memory. And then on the next micro-coded operation, the data from either there or from some other RAM location is sent through the system, or a combination of those things are sent through the system. Or if there's a limitation on the amount of bits that can be operated at the same time, then it involves doing some integration of the operations over time. So the idea is you're taking a complex parallel operation, or complex parallel circuit, and you're breaking it down into the necessary components to what you're doing is you're taking something that requires a lot of components, that it's like you're taking space and you're compressing it into time. So something that would happen instantly for the purposes of saving money has to be compressed. And if you push on one end, it has to come out in a different way. And how it comes out in a different way is that space is compressed into time. So time is being used to compensate for the space and the components that you can't afford. And that's what CPUs do. And so Tom was coming, and everybody was being made given access to CPUs, micro components on chips. And with that, there was a lot of inspiration, because now people could do their own computations and things, and use those in areas that they were interested in, because the business world's only interested in making money and making products and things. Engineers spend a long time wanting so much to have one extra component, because if they get that, then there's a whole bunch of projects that they can work on. And I'm sure Tom got access to a CPU, got access to components he was seeing at Polaroid, and and had an understanding of how to do digital electronics and analog electronics and mechanical engineering and, you know, and automation. He had all these things running around in his head, and he sorted them out, and he determined something really cool he could do with it, and he made it. Now, the reason why the rock bands, I believe, couldn't do everything that he did in his albums is because the patent system only permits you to patent certain things. So he could only patent the processes that were his proprietary understanding. But the processes that already existed, he couldn't patent. So it was kind of like he gave you the stuff that he could patent himself and make money off of, and the rest of the stuff was stuff that was already there, and it was some sort of relationship between the two. And possible another thing, this automation system is probably the thing that he'd figure people would figure out, but just didn't, you know. Because if you look at the last decade or so, what people have started to do and what people are getting excited about is old technology. It's modular subtractive synthesis and adjusting knobs. And then it's the idea of being able to control the knobs with other processes and creating states, being able to control states based upon certain outputs. And so that stuff, as that stuff becomes, people start using that more and more, they're going to be like, oh, well, you know, now I can automate things. But that's only part of that would explain what he did. But there's an extra step to that people are starting to refuse, that just boggles my mind, and that's the AI. Tom didn't have access to AI, or not to the degree we do today. And what the AI permits us to do is to analyze very complex data and replicate tones and qualities of information of others. You could effectively use AI to backwards engineer all the stuff that Tom did with his album and come up with all the processors, or an essential set of processes, possibly even a more optimal set of processes that would permit you to create the same kind of work. And, you know, now that he's really old, and he's probably doesn't give a shit, because he's made his money, and he's probably more well-to-do than other musicians, because he was involved in Polaroid, and he had special packages given to him. You know, he probably invested in stocks and all sorts of stuff. He didn't really need, probably doesn't really need to make money like other musicians do. There are people who make their money and then use that to do the things that they want to do, the artistic stuff and the engineering oriented stuff. That's the smart people. How I have my money is by sheer luck, you know, sheer chance. It was a result of something my dad had in his pension program. That's how I'm able to support myself, and that's the reason why I'm able to be creative and have time enough to, and no stress in having time enough to cognate over things like this. That's like the only difference between me and somebody who's working, is somebody who's working is being pressured into doing things that they don't want to do, and that gives them stress, and they try to unwind. They probably do better than I do in that they're cognating on things while they're working to relieve the stress. And so that's the thing is that, that it's not necessarily that I think better, it's that I don't have stress. And so my brain is freer to think about things. I'm not being pressured. I'm not having stuff shoved down my throat. I'm rather clear in my mind to kind of ponder stuff. And that's the reason why that's one of the things that we're going to lose when people start dissing and dropping religion like the Bible, because there are things in the Bible that emphasize the importance of rest and the importance of relaxing the mind, because it's through the relaxation that you're able to develop ideas, develop groundbreaking ideas. And we live in a society driven by business leaders and creditors and people that are so greedy, and that greed stresses the people out to the point, and the stress suppresses the cognition. And the people, the only people who are really thinking are the people who are in administration, and administrators don't have an understanding of the sciences. And so your scientists, unless the organization is smart enough to give them enough rest and time to ponder stuff. You see, that's the reason why Xerox PARC was so successful, is you took scientists, you took people who had been through college and had experienced things that nobody else has, and you give them enough time, enough money, and the freedom to rest and ponder. And when you do that, they develop technologies, they develop things in their head, and are able to come up with these technologies. They were under pressure to create technologies, but very light pressure, It was really the Xerox company that was just trying to research some technology that they could sell that would be a step up from the copier, a automated office workplace. And a lot more than that was created. And it took somebody like Steve Jobs, who was under pressure to create products, to come in and recognize the beauty of what they had produced. And the reason why it mesmerized him is because he's somebody who's overstressed, and he doesn't have the time to ponder and develop ideas. He can see the value of the products because he's presented the problems, and he knows the parameters of things that he knows the things that he needs that he doesn't have. And Xerox PARC had the things that he needed. And when he saw those things, they inspired him. And then he went through this phase of getting upset at Xerox because it was kind of like it was kind of a bunch of idiots with money giving money and time to scientists, which is not idiotic. It's just, to him, it looked like they were sitting on a cash cow and they were not milking it. And that was the reason why he got upset. And he even said at the time that he didn't see everything that was going on there. It was just one thing that was so beautiful to him that just glowed in his face, and that was the graphical user interface controlled by a mouse. And that was the thing that he took away from that. The reason why he was even brought in there in the first place was because the Xerox executives didn't know how to sell their product. They had the product there. They had the Alto computer, which was a graphical interface, and it had a mouse, and it had a language that was visual called Smalltalk, and the the graphical interface and everything could be programmed in situ. As the thing's operating, you could be adding operations to the windows and adjusting things in the computer. But if you wanted to sell the software, you had to actually sell the state of the entire computer. That's the reason why people turned to Java, because Java was able, Sun was able to put all to create an object-based language, an interpretive object language, and hide it in a tokenized programmable, So the idea was that instead of selling the state, and we do that these days using virtual machines, we create schemas and we store them in a virtual machine, and then we deploy them, and we can sell those. And so it's kind of like we're going back to the days of Smalltalk, by being able to share the program, because what you're selling is a complex system of connections of objects and processes that rely on what exists already in the Smalltalk system. And so if you were going to sell what you had in that system, it would almost be the exact same as open source. And so to people that were involved in software development, commercial software development, couldn't have that. They couldn't do that because it'd be like giving away the company secrets. They had to have some way of being able to compile the information. And what compiling involves is turning source code, codified thought, into something much more integrated and specific to a processor or to a virtual machine, which is what Java uses, as a virtual machine. And that virtual machine is compiled in machine code. And nobody is going to read machine code in order to figure out how things like that work. But an AI can. And that's what's going to happen over the coming years, is people are going to start using AIs to decompile executables and turn everything into open source. And that's probably going to scare the fuck out of all of these empires of software developers. They know they have to jump on the AI bandwagon, because that's the next stage, and all that other stuff, all that legacy technology is going to get assimilated by the AI, and the processes that are there, whether they're patented or not, are just going to become free software. They're going to, because it doesn't take a leap of the imagination to understand what the AI can do. You give it complex data, you give it the result, and then from that it's able to devise how the complex data was used to create the result. So the complex data is your source code, the result is your executable. It just has to figure out how the source code turned into the executable. And there you go. And then it can do it backwards. It can take the executable and turn it back into source code. It will find all the multiple different kinds of source code that produce the same executable, but it's going to figure out the processes and um, the special technology that went into creating or making that work, how it works and everything. And that's what's going to cause us to change from an age of capitalism into what Star Trek is, which is a very social system. Is the AI technology is going to do that? And but anyhow, people really need to be using it. They need to be using the AI because it's the closest thing to having our brains linked to the information sources and stuff. Instead of having our brains linked to the information, we would replicate ourselves in the computer and have that analyzing the information, and we would have it watered down for our use. And that's where the AI really comes in. It permits us to do the things that we would want to do and use all of the schools of thought that we don't have the time to learn to do the things we want to do. And there's always that danger. There's always this danger people always are afraid of, oh, if this thing got out, it would kill everybody. People point out that there are doers of chlorine gas on our railroad tracks, that if they just blew open, it'd kill hundreds of thousands of people. And this has been true for years. Why doesn't it happen? The people who don't believe there's a God, those are the people that dumbfound me, because it's obvious that there is a God, because if there wasn't, we'd been dead a long time ago. It's just knowing all the things that could go wrong and the fact that things haven't gone wrong that could go wrong. I can think of ways to ways for a terrorist to hide in our, and I've already talked about on my YouTube channel that there is a way a terrorist could penetrate any kind of organization using just a cell phone. And it's basically a cell phone that's not connected to the internet. Whenever you're not connected to any networks, it's a closed system. Nobody's going to know what you're doing inside of it. It's a handheld computer with a terabyte of information at its disposal, fast processor. It doesn't take a leap of the imagination to figure out what I'm getting at, at least for engineers. And why hasn't it already happened? Why haven't these things already happened? Because there is a creator, and the creator is involved in keeping the shit from hitting the fan. There is shit hitting the fan, but it's necessary shit. But the shit that would end the whole thing, if you're a creator and you create a complex system and you're fascinated, you're going to do everything in your power to keep that system from fucking itself up or from getting fucked up. And you do that by analyzing what's going on and compensating for it. So the thing is, and the thing that creator wants you not to do is stress. Because the creator knows how our bodies work intimately and knows that stress suppresses a lot of systems. It's there for us to run away from tigers quickly and survive in that way. But all the other sorts of greedy, evil things that go on in the world can stress us out and make us unproductive and ineffective. And the religion is, a good bit of it is about us ridding ourselves of those things that would hamper our ability to work effectively. And the adoption of evolution as an idea and survival of the fittest is just going to drive us more into that stress. It is not going to fix us. It is going to ruin us. And especially if you throw the ideas of the Christian religion out the window, because it's the only religion that actually has logic in it. All the other religions are all adaptive. They're all superstition. Superstition is developed from catastrophes and the response to catastrophes. It's stories that are developed as a result of facing certain situations. And it's kind of like, this happened, so how we can prevent this from ever happening again, we can adopt this certain behavior. And that's superstition. We just, how do we avoid, this from happening? Will we appease this certain God? And really all that is that satisfying. It's really it's stress relief. It's relieving our stress through trying to control a complex system that we can't possibly control, but we would be overstressed if we thought we couldn't. We would say, well, it's inevitable. We're doomed to failure and stuff. And that kind of thought process results in us. It ruins us. And so superstition and all these natural behaviors, throwing babies into volcanoes and sacrifices and stuff, and there are examples in the Bible where God would ask somebody to do something. There was one in particular where, he told somebody to go and sacrifice their baby, and then he stopped them. And what he was really, what God, and sorry for using the pronoun he, because God's a unique being. It's not necessarily, there's no real gender there. It's God is God, We're humans. We're unique beings individually, but we're also overall a species, and a species that's configured in a certain way. But overall, we kind of work the same way. So as individuals, we're much the same, but we're unique in some way or another. So I'm Kiernan, and someone else is Tom, and other one's Yvonne or whatever. We're individuals. We're unique individuals, and we have names. And that's the reason why there is in the trans community the need for people to stop identifying each other by gender or sexual or, because gender takes different forms. And it's important. Some of it's physical, some of it's mental, and it's in the brain, and it's in the body, and it's hard to separate out, and that's the reason why it's an issue. And there are people that desire to have it all simple, be males and females and stuff like that. There are people who have both organs, male and female. And that was a mistake that that Kennedy guy made, is that he would not recognize mixed gender in sexual orientation, physical sexual orientation. He wanted to separate it out, and he was completely ignorant of another aspect that can't be easily separated out. There are things that affect people that government just doesn't want to have anything to do with, because they don't want to produce the complex policies necessary to adapt to everybody's physical difference, disease, and whatnot. And I think that's the reason why Trump kind of makes fun of people who have special problems, like that reporter, why he got, is because he's trying to, making America great again also means going backwards, running things back to a time when things were simpler, but yet less individualized. And that's the danger in what he's doing. But it's a way of fixing the system. What you're doing is you're backtracking, and then you're trying a different path. And that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to get back to something that's recognizable, and then, somewhere in that there'll probably be a way of devising a better path, because clearly we're in a system right now that we can't control, and that kind of controls us and puts the power in the hands of a relative few, which is not what we want. This country was formed with the idea of the people having the power and being able to manage the country through individual thought and collective reasoning. We can't do that anymore, because now the reasoning's in the hand of a relative few, and they're using processes to engineer our free will, so we don't have any free will. And in the Bible, to deny people free will is a sin, because God gives everyone free will. And so the engineering of people limiting their free will and so that's the idea that I do what I do and it doesn't affect you. If it affects you, then it's limiting your free will, and therefore it's evil, and there's a good reason to put me in jail for that, And that's what the police are in charge of, is trying to manage the free will so that everybody has the free will, but nobody is perpetrating anybody else's free will, which is, non-consensual sex is an example. Rape is an example of a limiting of free will. It's forcing somebody else. It's just like fascism, where you use a bat to beat somebody down. You're beating them into submission. You're limiting their free will. It's evil. And governments turn to fascism, totalitarian, authoritarian governments turn to fascism as a way of keeping the peace, keeping people in order. But what they're really doing is they're limiting people's capacities, their freedoms, their capacity to be themselves and to do the things that they want to do that don't affect anybody else. And as a result of the internet and all the conspiracy theory and all of the crap that puts the fear into people and stresses them out, that suppresses their cognition, it is going to be the ultimate unraveling of this country. And by relying on the government to fix the things we're afraid of. And I think the AI will probably help in this area because, but there are people who will not be involved with AI because they think it's evil, And really what AI is it's the ultimate conservatism. Conservatives cannot be conservatives because they're not going back and educating themselves about what makes up the working parts of our system, the essentials. They have some of the essentials, but the world's become so complex that there's no possible way that they have all the essentials. And so they're going to have to turn to AI in order to make up for what they don't have a grasp of, to be conservative of, to conserve the values, necessary to exist in this complex, ever-changing system. And so when your conservatives will not accept AI because it looks evil, or it is going to affect their employment or something like that, they're actually putting the power into someone else's hands, and those people have access to all of the necessary information that those conservatives are not going to have access to unless they use AI, because the other option is to go and get educated, to go to school, and to develop understandings in all of the areas necessary in order to maintain the state of a working, great America. And what that leads to is it's just ignorance, it's just plain perpetuated ignorance. It's complacency, There are parts in the Bible that try to avoid complacency, the idea that if you found your life, then you'll surely lose it. That's complacency. You found where you're satisfied, the thing that satisfies you, you're happy where you are. There's no reason for you to move. There's no reason for you to benefit anybody else. You're just going to always be there, kind of like you're on a drug. And the conservatives don't even realize that even though they're not doing drugs, they do have their drugs. They do have their things that keep them stuck and complacent. And as a result of the survival and dependency on goods from China and, cheap goods, and the feedback that produces the unemployment as a result of that, is going to force them to become liberals, or it's going to lead them to a number of different avenues. They're going to be they're going to either get educated or not get educated. They're going to, it's okay if they rely on the Bible, but, as I said, the word isn't only in the Bible, it's in other places. And, it actually is the case that you could go without a lot of knowledge. And it's possible that none of this can be fixed and that it's getting fixed by the Creator. And, that's the reason why a lot of the atheists push back on religion, or they're atheists in the first place, is they're afraid that religion will hamper our abilities to develop technologies and sciences and other things that would be subdued by simplistic reasoning of Christians, and who use the religion as a law to limit free will, which is evil. I've said it's evil. We all have to have the capacity to have choice and free will, whether it's good or bad. You can't keep other people from sinning. It shouldn't be a process. The only thing you can do is suggest that other people not do things, but you will not know why you don't do those things. If you're doing it because you've been told not to do it, but you don't understand why not to do it, or your brain is not working, it's going to make those people that are involved in trying to find things out really mad at you, frustrated with you, and they're not going to change. And it's something that our own brains do, that whenever you put in too much drugs, and you get a immunity to dopamine, and then as a result of that, you get ultimately depressed. And so the thing is you can't keep people from being happy. You can't keep people from doing the things they want to do to be happy in the way that they prefer to be happy. If they're not hurting you, then you should allow them to do what they want to do if it makes them happy. If they die from it, well, at least they were happy when they died. But if you push back on those processes, unless you have a way of making them happier, so you just have to have a faith that they're going to come around. God's not going to come out and fix us. God's going to give us a way, and we either take it or we don't. But we have to have the freedom to do that, and there's a reason for that, and that is we have to come to an understanding that it is a good way. So, anyhow, this all started with Tom Scholz and his making, it's interesting how my cognition and these little things just end up somewhere down the road doing something completely different. And I'm not going to explain why I do this, because I understand perfectly. I've said that it's because of dopamine flood in the brain. I'm not doing drugs to a great degree, because if you short circuit the dopamine process too much, you'll get a dopamine immunity to the dopamine response, and then you just have perpetual depression, and you can't get out of it because the brain has already shut down response to dopamine, the reward for good behavior. also the reward from drugs. That's the reason why there are people who object to other people doing drugs, is because they can see them somewhere down the road dying as a result of it, either dying from the drugs or dying from the resulting depression that it can't be medicated. And so